Besides, this will probably leak over into weekly marks, actually, because this is essentially what weekly marks. Oh, Ote. 27 December. Jesus. Welcome to This and That. I began the little project of I think it went on too long the to prepare. And this is a long, convoluted story. You will recall, I know, that I showed an example probably a week or two ago that of comparing the difference between uh, uh, chapter three of volume one of Marx's Capital and the Princeton version. And it was skipping ahead a little bit only because I think I came across notes or whatever, and I thought that was a good comparison. And while I was preparing it today, I forgot that I have to finish up when I introduced several over a month ago, chapter one, volume one of the new Princeton translation, and I forgot to include the whole set. And this is sort of, fortunately, I've did all this stupid preparation, so I can just explain it quickly and then start what I was going to do. So, what we'll probably do for weekly marks is continue on with this because I'll just read from that because not that my reading is better, but it's slightly better than the mechanical readings that I was trying to foist off on you before in a variety of ways. So, not that my reading is any better, but I think at least it'll seem a little more together. So what we need to do is eventually get to chapter two, volume one, and that will happen with weekly marks, which is at 3 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. Chapter two is short, thankfully, I suppose. It's on the exchange process. So the comparison I threw in here, and I know no one will care about that, but I the prior English translation, which is available on the internet that at Marxist.org, is the version that was predominant before the Princeton edition. So you can see I just put in a little section of it so you can see that there is a difference, and it actually is quite significant, the difference between this older version and the latest version, and what they did to correct that. And as I've said before, and as a high school English teacher reminded me of that, uh, that it's actually more important to read the notes, the footnotes. So anyway, thankfully, chapter two is short. Now this is I'm going to do and I'll plow through this sort of because I what I didn't include in the last little thing I did was to talk about the editor's notes of chapter one. And so this may seem a little tedious, but it actually is kind of interesting, or well, maybe interesting. Um, so here we go. This is not Marx's notes. This is the editors and translators notes that are in lower case Latin numerals. So you can have the uh, Arab numbers, which are the footnotes, and then the second level down, the sub basement, is the lowercase uh, the lowercase Roman numerals. I know that you're probably already lost, but it really is actually coherent, and, and actually kind of interesting. Well, it depends whether you want the minutia of German, philology, I suppose, or um. Anyway, Marx uses the phrase "erscheinen als," translated mostly as "appears as," in what follows, twice in the first lines of Capital and many times throughout the book. He tends to employ this uncommon phrase in a fairly technical sense, saying that the wealth of capitalist societies erscheint als an enormous accumulation of commodities wouldn't have sounded like natural German to the first readers of Capital, unless they had read a lot of Hegel, who had developed a whole language of appearance. Marx initially planned to take on the task of translating the first chapters of Capital into English because, as he wrote in a letter to Engels, it won't be easy, but it will be unavoidable to develop a vocabulary that works as a way to translate the Hegelian terminology. Still, Erschein als is probably less of a curveball for German readers than appears as is for their English counterparts. A key reason why is that German has two words for appear, erscheinen and scheinen, which the latter meaning appear in the sense of seem. So the English phrase appears as immediately suggests the possibility of false appearance in a way that the German phrase erscheint als doesn't. In other words, it suggests something along the lines of merely appears to be much more than erscheint als does. Although in Capital, Marx sometimes uses erscheinen als to signify misleading appearance. I hope you're still with me, particularly in the section on wages. German's er prefix, which is related to its famous ur prefix, frequently indicates accomplishment or realization. Kämpfen is to fight, but erkämpfen is to achieve by fighting, and erscheinen versus scheinen loosely conforms to that pattern. So for a fuller account of what appearance means in Capital, and the Hegelian background here, see editorial note. This is the editorial notes. We're at number 1. See editorial note 13 to this chapter below. Editorial note 2. Throughout, the German word unmittelbar is translated with the idiomatic German English direct or directly. It should be kept in mind that Marx refers here to one half of a pair of modes crucial to Hegel's philosophy, unmittelbar and mittelbar, immediate or unmediated, and mediate or mediated. Unmittelbar refers to the unmediated first blush, unreflected, simple appearance of something, which later on in the analysis always turns out to be made up of a much more complex relation. An unmediated appearance is revealed to depend altogether for its character on another thing, and so is in fact mediated by that thing. Money is the unmediated, direct appearance of value. But of course, as we learn, what allows money to represent value is that it is in constant communication with workers, production, commodities, exchange, circulation, imperialism, and so on. In short, the unmediated form of something temporarily disguises that thing's position in a multiform process, in a process of processes, in a global system, regardless of how well or how violently it works. Money does burn holes in people's pockets, perhaps. Actually, credit cards do. Editor's note 3. Here, Marx uses the term Warenkörper as a singular noun, and it refers to a commodity's body, the thing that gives it its useful properties. As a plural noun, Warenkörper evokes one of the ways in which commodities exist, namely as physical commodity bodies. The terms opposite and complement is Warenwerte, because, as we will see, commodities also exist as non-physical commodity values. You see, there is a story here. You have to sort of wade through it, and you know, that it is as complicated perhaps as the language itself. Maybe that's why all those wars happen. Anyway, note 4. The word translated as human beings is the singular noun der Mensch, which presents challenges beyond the one that applies here. Does it need to be translated as a plural noun? Mensch signifies human being, but its meaning can also be more abstract than that. It can signify humanity, and especially in its plural form, less abstract. That is, it can signify people too. It is translated all 3 ways in this text, making our task even more complicated in just reading. Note 5, material can refer to physical stuff, also sometimes called matter in American English, and it can be used as a technical philosophical term, a concept opposite to the concept of spirit or mind, that is Geist, which is immaterial and not directly perceivable. Although Marx wrote his doctoral dissertation on both of these meanings of material, somewhat counterintuitively, the words Marx usually turns to in capital, which include Stoff and Stofflich, material and materiel, are equivocal. Sometimes he uses them to refer to physical stuff, sometimes to a particular kind of social stuff. That's a very technical term that underlies capital. Thus, use value is the material content of wealth, even if the wealth is currently in a form quite distant from use. For example, a government bond. Material does not mean matter here, but rather using a commodity to satisfy a need. As a rule, material refers to physical stuff when Marx talks about it in the sphere of nature. This he sometimes calls the material substrate of human activity. At other times, material has a new critical meaning. It refers to the social basis for economic relations when he talks about it in the sphere of human things. There, material means a social thing that makes capitalist abstractions possible. A social thing always involves real-time relations between people that pertain somehow to their needs. For example, wage labor is material insofar as it is how one set of people interacts with another in order to sustain their lives. We should note, in addition, that it was Marx's friend and writing partner, Friedrich Engels, who developed the material conception of history, for example, historical materialism, in his text, Socialism, Utopian and Scientific of 1880 and elsewhere. This notion was then advanced by Vladimir Lenin in Materialism and the Empirical Criticism of 1908 and taken up by many other Marxists, including Marx's first biographer, Franz Mehring. It is a pretty significant thing because Lenin does try to make it even more scientific. He's really digging into the question of how much this is a science. Not exactly a popular document for the people, however. Number 6, in this translation, an ellipsis that comes at the end of a paragraph and is followed by a single term, generally one Marx is built up to and is unveiling, indicates emphasis rather than elision. In the German text, Marx uses a dash in these cases, but the German dash, or der Gedankenstrich, enjoys a certain weight as its name, that is, thought stroke, implies that the dash in English lacks. And with a space on either side of it, Marx's German dash heightens the effect of buildup, the wait for it effect that he seems to be going for. Number 7, the Latin phrase contradictio in adjecto means contradiction in terms. Number 8, yes, there are more of these. This goes on up till 30-something or other, or 40-something or other. So I'm not going to do them all today. I arrived late, so I'm going to do a little bit more and then shut the hell up because we have an evening of after hours to get to, and where we'll where food is more important. All right, number 8, Nicholas Barbon or Barbon. Uh, Barbon was a English entrepreneur and economic theorist, an early critic of mercantilism. Barbon sparred with Locke, but shared his view that since money and commodities lack intrinsic value, they shouldn't be stockpiled. Barbon and Locke were pioneers of this position. Gespen Gespenstiger, Stiger, and Gegenständlichkeit is the phrase translated here as ghostly objecthood. The German term Gegenstand, Gegenstand, whatever, means object, while the suffix licht turns a noun into an adjective, and the suffix keit turns a adjective into a noun. See how much German we're learning here? The English word objectivity matches the morphology, but has come to be associated so thickly with disinterestedness that employing it directs readers away from what Marx seems to have had in mind. For in Capital, he generally uses gegen, gegen, Gegenständlichkeit to evoke what value is under capitalism. On the one hand, an object; on the other hand, not fully there, an apparition of an object. So, Gegenständlichkeit, Gegenständlichkeit also signifies the objecthood of human labor, a living process made into an object, human labor in its coagulated state, as he likes to say. And when it comes to value, the product of abstract labor, the object is neither a physical thing nor a mental construct. Marx dropped the neologistic term thought thing to Gedankenting after the first edition of Capital, where its function is to describe value. So you can see in some ways what was going on here. There were some things he was thinking about at the front end, particularly in the first edition. And the second edition, there's lots of corrections. Value in capitalist society is a social substance that operates beyond the consciousness of the people in such societies, although it affects them and moreover behaves like a physical thing, even though it doesn't contain even an atom of matter, and sometimes acts more like a soul, transmigrating from one body to another. Marx, in fact, emphasizes that value is human labor that is no longer in its fluid state and exists in a solidified post-fluid form, im Ronnenen Zustand. Hence, he keeps imagining value in terms of discrete pieces, blobs, and masses, and speaks of how the commodity exists as a value thing, value-thing, that has a special, purely social value objecthood. Gegenständlichkeit. In addition, I know I'm just torturing this. In addition to the regular objecthood it possesses as a physical thing, the commodity, owing to the double character of the labor represented in it, has a non-physical objecthood that contrasts with its other objecthood, that crude thing for the senses, but is still an objecthood, a paradoxical, ghostly objecthood that can simply dematerialize or vanish without a trace if the social relation that sustains it changes. Needless to say, the image of a gelatinous blob doesn't neatly cohere with the idea of ghostly, and numerous critics have commented on this rhetorical dissonance. Gelert is the German term Marx uses just after Gespenstige Gegenstandlichkeit, and it denotes a blob of gelatin made from bone marrow, something people bought and ate in and beyond 19th century Europe. And usually you have it on toast, when there's probably some other metaphor that can be used, I suppose, there. Interestingly, the Grimm's Deutsche Wörterbuch warns that Gestandlichkeit, uh, Gegenstandlichkeit doesn't coincide with the Latinate word objectivad. That is, Gegenstandlichkeit is more sensuous, more gegenstandlich, as the Wörterbuch Riley puts it, adding that Gegenstandlichkeit tends to suggest something more concrete than the purely conceptual term objecti objectivitat. Isn't to suggest that the questions of what value is in capital and where it exactly comes into being have been settled. And needless to say, Marx scholars continue to offer competing examples. And yes, that's probably where we're all tied up with. And in fact, that's probably why, there's been this more recent sort of working through of value form problems, but we haven't even gotten there yet. Marx uses the term social and socially in a distinctive way in Capital. American English tends to say social to communicate gregariousness or conviviality, a desire to be together in a group. Marx's use of social is different, usually pertaining to a particular society, made by the society rather than by nature, the singular way things are organized in this human grouping. Societal is another possible translation. Throughout the Capital Project, Marx uses the term gesellschaftlich to make a critical distinction. A thing that is social is not first and foremost formal or technical or natural, and certainly not metaphysical or logical. What seems like a special kind of entity or a functional part of the system is actually a mode of socializing in this system. This distinction is important for Marx to argue against the method and results of classical political economy and its practical adherents, the so-called vulgar economists who treat commodities, for example, as technical features of the economy, rather than the perverted form that interactions among people take in this kind of economy. Value needs to be understood as a crystallized piece of a social substance, abstracted from real interactions among actors, but nonetheless essentially social or societal. Social is a term of critique. It reveals the concealed basis for seemingly technical economic aspects in human relations, albeit the distorted ones under capital. Number 11. The German wording translated here as presents itself to us as erscheint uns als, refers to us as would have, it appears to us as would have the advantage of consistency, since erschein als is generally rendered as appear as opposed to appears to us as. And the question of how the capitalist system is simultaneously a system of appearances is a crucial one in the book. But the English phrase appears to us strongly suggests a subjective impression and thus would take the reader in the wrong direction. So you really, there are these subtleties, these nuances actually are pretty important because the difference between appearance and essence is right at work always. But you bring that perception to it. I'm going to stop in a moment. Don't worry. My bad pronunciation of German you'll have to suffer through. Number 12, the world of capital is not made up of separated independent beings, but rather is a mesh of interrelated phenomena with internal linkages. One kind of linking is when something appears as another thing. There seem to be two other closely related modes of internal linking for Marx. Something can, quote, express itself in something else, and something can represent itself in, as, or through something else. So you can see the slight difference there. Expression or Ausdrucken implies an inner thing, part of which gets pushed out to become an external thing. Representation, that is a representation or presentation. Darstellen implies that a thing elsewhere has an image of it or an aspect of it placed here where we can encounter it. The English words express and present are very much alike in form and meaning to their German counterparts. The metaphor expression came into philosophy with Gottfried Leibniz's mirror theory of mind, and since then has had a long career, particularly in philosophical aesthetics. And note, of course, that this is, this appeals to Lenin eventually. Number 13, the capital system depends on appearances. Marx makes this point already in the book's first sentence. The basic intuition is that the capital system is not transparent, much like religion as Marx sees it. The capital system hides some of its operations and depends on looking different than it is. It is easier to see the priest's tithe, he jokes, than the blessing he promises. As in some religions, looking different is part of how capitalism operates. Things appear as other things. Your actual ownership of a house only appears as, your property. Rather, it is the bank's ultimately. Appearances derive from the system itself. It ceaselessly throws off appearances without which it wouldn't be able to function. Capitalists need to see value as coming from their activities. Laborers need to see wages as fair recompense for their labor. Consumers need to look at a sandwich and see food, not value. The main mechanisms that depend on appearance in this volume are commodity fetishism, chapter 1, and the wage form, chapter 17. Both of these capitalistic phenomena have appearance, German Erscheinung, as a necessary part of their functioning. And because they don't understand this kind of appearance, the vulgar economists remain with something less than appearances, in German signal to the word Schein. What is Marx's overall attitude towards appearance? In crediting appearance as real, he follows a development in modern philosophy. Immanuel Kant raised Erscheinung above mere Schein when he defined human cognition as limited to what can legitimately appear to it. Kant called Erscheinung any humanly experienceable phenomenon and opposed it to a thing in itself that can never be experienced directly. Kant's theory revised ancient Hellenic reasoning going back to Parmenides' 6th century BCE philosophical poem and systematized in Plato's writings of the late 5th and early 4th centuries BCE that held appearances to be opposed to truth, being, and reality. In order to make knowledge scientific, Kant discovers that he has to make appearances into a kind of reality for human cognition. Hegel changes this around somewhat, taking an even more positive view of appearance. That is, essence must appear, Hegel writes in the Logic, and in the Encyclopedia, which is the much more coherent version, we would say, he elaborates that essence is not behind or beyond appearance. An essence without an appearance is blind. An appearance without an essence is empty. Essences are in their appearances, and reality is the multiple possible appearances of something. Now, that's kind of important, and you can sort of imagine that's a very different point of view about taking on a different point of view about the world, how we perceive the world, and you can see how that can have an effect for people sort of integrating the understanding of Marx, particularly the logic, as opposed to what people tend to look at is not Hegel's logic, but rather the phenomenology. Hegel's demand that appearance itself be taken as essential stands close to Marx's use of the term, but Marx changes the territory from general metaphysics to a specific historical form. Appearance is essential to capitalism, and he agrees with Hegel that appearance is objective, not subjective. It is neither any personal illusion nor a limitation in human cognition that makes things appear one way and also be another. This means that we cannot simply correct our thinking using philosophy to move in a truer vision. We can, however, understand the fact that appearance is a necessary part of the system and understand that the true movements go together with their appearances. Understanding this complex structure will not remove the appearances as it would if it were simply a correction of bad thinking or a false perception. To change the system, it is not enough to raise consciousness or to portray it as it really is. This system really is commodity form and wage form, commodity dash form and wage dash form. Its reality is both what it actually is and how it appears. Marx makes this clear, hopefully, with his use of the important term of art, Erscheinungsform, form of appearance. Forms of appearance are many and are continually being invented by the system. Value, for example, has many forms of appearance. It appears as use value and exchange value. And exchange value can appear as a commodity, including labor or money. So you have a way in which you can see a multiplicity of things. This is value with the big V, has all of these elements. Maybe I will stop there just because I probably have already lost you, aside from my bad German. So we'll take this up again, and this will seem highly tedious, but hopefully you'll get a chance to sort of look at the material I put forward and see where it all connects. So I've included the link here to get back to chapter 1, volume 1, to see the original text itself, because we did actually do that, lo, those many weeks ago. And so you can sort of see where this little editor's note in the lower case Roman numerals, as opposed to Marx's notes in the new translation, which are just in regular, Arabic alphanumerics. So I do hope you can hang in there. This is it all comes together. It makes a sense. With respect, you really can see what kind of is going on here. That Marx went through several editions, changed it fairly significantly between the first and second editions. I think, as you can see in the comparison we looked at before between the different, the German, the French version, the first edition versus the second edition. And yes, this is all very tedious, but, Marx is kind of working through this idea, and we're sort of being dragged along with him. And it's unfortunate that we've had these sort of revisionisms that we look at. We discover a text that was ignored or not translated or not distributed or whatever, the early Marx or certain things that were products of the late Marx, but which reveal a kind of, interesting draft combinations, the Grundrisse, for example. And so Marxian scholarship has all of these elements going on, and a lot of ink has gotten spilled over, excuse me, arguing about things of value. So I know all that was so incredibly clear, and let me stop right now and see if there were questions. Brickbats, oh my. And thank you, Anna. And German pronunciation is so much easier than English. What that is true. The problem of English is that it is such a polyglot that American English, has all of these loans or stuff stolen from other languages that get very screwed up and get even more screwed up in regional American English. No different than what occurs in Great Britain and Ireland, but that's another story. Nancy actually asked the question, do you identify as a commodity? That's the issue, sort of, can raise at a variety of complex things like sex work, etc. And let's see, what else? Lane says, yes, thank you, Lane. It is Everly night on BBC4, which may take all of us somewhere else. The Everly Brothers, aside from Tom Cruise's, oh, no, that's the Righteous Brothers. Anyway, uh, like, I'm so old. Anyway, let me, if there are no interventions, brickbats, questions, uh, denunciations, I will ask Joe to stop the live stream and we can go back to swearing at each other before after hours, which occurs for us at the top of the hour. Twilight Zone will be on later tonight. Um, and we'll talk further about that later. So I'm going to stop share now and hope that Joe is has endured my bad German and everything.